All right, welcome back to another episode of the 100% Wild Podcast. I'm Mark Kenyon with Wired to Hunt. Next to me here, Mr. Matt Drury.
Hello.
Good to be here.
I'm happy and excited because we got a really cool guest.
We had a great
today.
guest.
Yeah.
I've chatted with him a handful of times, and every time I walk away from those conversations, more excited about deer hunting and more informed.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, there's a couple guys, of course there's tons of guys out there in the real world hunting situations that you just don't know their names, they're not publicized or whatever, that know the stuff inside and out.
A lot of silent killers out there.
But there's a few guys, a handful of guys in the industry, Mark Drury being one. I think Lee Lakosky is definitely another one, and that's who we have the pleasure of joining us today, Lee Lakosky from The Crush.
Welcome to the show, Lee.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Good deal. Well, Lee, before we get into the question of the day, I did want to mention, we kind of have a long history, the Drury Outdoors, Mark and Terry, and Lee and Tiffany, of course, several different ways that we kind of intertwine. One of them, I edited a couple of Tiffany's first ever hunts.
Really?
Back when she and Lee were, and you guys weren't married yet even, they were working with the Kiskies. At the time, I believe it was the Whitetails Taking It to the Extreme video title. And I was interning for Mark and Terry, and I was in Terry's office down in Bloomsdale, so not our studio, it was his construction shop, and they set my computer up in Dad's room, his literal office, and he was over my shoulder watching me edit for an entire summer. Wow. Let me tell you, that's not an enjoyable thing, but that's where I learned how to edit. One of the major places I learned how to edit, with him over my shoulder, and I was working on I edited that entire video title. I think it was Whitetails Taking It to the Extreme 4 or 3 or one of those. And Lee and Tiffany, and it was Tiffany's two of her hunts that I vividly remember working on those hunts. So
that's cool.
Yeah.
Really bringing back, that had to be close to 20 years ago.
Yes.
Like I said before, we were married, and she had just started hunting. Then we just started filming that the first year. So that really does bring back a lot of good memories back in those days, I tell you.
Yeah. Then the other cool little piece of history is, I believe this is correct. You let me know, but the place where your home place now, I believe Mark and Terry used to lease that way back in the day, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it was good because when we bought it, the first thing I did was call Mark. Okay, where are the hot spots? Tell me where they're at. And everything. And, it's cool that of all the places in Iowa you could go, you pick the one farm in the one little spot of the state that somebody had hunted before. It's just that's pretty amazing that happened that way. Me not knowing that. Just seeing, I think I saw Mark at the ATA show, so I'm telling him I bought a place, and he's like, no, when I'm telling him where it was, I know exactly where that is. Terry and I had a giant fight in that tree.
Oh, that's the
spot where they had the fight. I didn't know that. That's even better.
That's awesome.
Because we've talked about that fight on this podcast several times.
Notorious.
So it's cool to circle back with where it happened.
That's so funny.
Well, thanks for joining us. We're going to dive into the question here, but I just wanted to stroll down memory lane real quickly before we went down this path.
Yeah. And we got an interesting topic today with our question of the day that I think Lee's definitely going to have some interesting things to share. So do we want to get right into that one?
Yeah, absolutely. The question of the day is brought to you by Cabela's, the world's foremost outfitter.
Hey guys, my name's Evan. I'm from Alabama, and I have a question regarding the rut and the photo period. I've always read and heard that the photo period really determines pretty much everything about the rut, but I was going to see if you guys could explain that in further detail. Like, does the rut peak when the days are at their shortest, or just any information y'all could give me explaining that in further detail would be very helpful. Thanks.
I've heard all that too. Obviously, we've read about it, we've heard about it, and I've talked to a lot of the biologists about it and things. But the one thing that never really made sense to me about that was when you go in some of the southern states, like Alabama, you can go to one county that the rut was in November, and you go over one county, and it's the same exact sunrise and sunset, and it's in January. But, Larry Weishuhn told me one time about this. He goes, my opinion on this is that all you have to do is you go to the time of the year, the best food sources available in your area, and go back 6 months, and that's when the rut will be. Now, that one always seemed to make more sense to me than the photo period. And maybe it is a combination, some of both. But like here, most of our fawns are dropping in, in May and June. You go back, it's in November, but that's right when all the green up is. That's when our soybeans are coming up. But then you go to some places where it's not agricultural. And I think like I said, in Alabama, somewhere it's just hardwoods. It's a month or two later, because that's when you get more mass crop and different things like that. So that one always made more sense to me, is when the best food source was available, just go back 6 months. And that kind of what explains to me why some of the southern states that you've got, the rut in January and into February, and in the same state, and just a different county over what might be a little more farming, agricultural stuff, it's in November. So that always made more sense to me. Now, I don't know which one is, like I said, I'm not a biologist. I just know what I see, because I'm out every day looking at deer and stuff, so I can tell you exactly when things are happening. Here on our home farm, we have our live camera on our website and stuff. I can watch deer. I can see when they start pushing nose around and stuff. So I really know my farms, and my farm in Missouri that we have now, and we have one in Illinois. But as far as the whole country, that's the one thing that kind of made sense to me. So I can't really explain the photo period. I've heard all that same things from different biologists, but there's always that one hitch when you get some of the places down south, when it's, why is it 2 months later in the same state, just in a different part of the state? That the light isn't getting darker an hour earlier one county over. So that's what always kind of made sense to me, and that's kind of what I kind of believe that. But like I said, I'm not a biologist, but that always made sense to me. What do you guys think?
Well, I can jump in, I guess. As far as the photo period, to his question about that, as I understand that from everything the biologists I've talked to and everything, the photo period is basically the amount of light in a day, and that changes at a consistent rate throughout the year after year. Photo period, through the eye, as the deer is pulling that light, that connects to a part of the brain that then triggers hormones. It triggers testosterone throughout the year in a buck. It triggers estrogen for a female throughout the year. And so those hormones are changing throughout the year, like a slow, steady decline and then a slow, steady increase as that photo period changes. So, for example, in a buck, throughout the summer, as that photo period increases, we're getting antler growth. As your daylight starts, as the day is getting shorter, that starts declining, testosterone starts rising, you get antler velvet drop, and then those bucks start getting pretty amped up, leading into the rut. Females then estrogen's ramping up, leading them up to that point where they're ready to breed. So from the biologist standpoint, everything I've heard is that it is a consistent factor. Photo period is what drives when a female is ready to breed. There's then, though, a lot of theories, though, about what might reveal daylight activity, what might lead to the most chasing and seeking and all that kind of stuff. Now that seems to be really up in the air. There can be moon, weather, a lot of food sources, all sorts of different things like that. I think that is up for debate. But the photo period piece, at least from a scientific aspect, there's been a lot of studies around this. They've looked to try to see, does peak breeding, so when the most does are getting bred, is that affected by the moon? Is that affected by temperature? And no one's able to correlate those things with peak breeding. It's always connected and correlated with that changing photo period. And they've been able to test this by going and collecting roadkill does and pulling out the fetuses. And then actually there's a fetus measurement scale where you're able to backdate those fawns, those fetuses. And you can say, okay, based on the length and size of this fawn in April or June or whatever it is, this was actually conceived on November 15th. And they collect thousands and thousands and thousands of these. And they've got basically a bell curve that you get. In most areas, you can talk to biologists. We talked about this on a past episode. You see a consistent bell curve with a peak breeding date on X, and then it goes down on either side of that. So maybe 20% of the breeding happened on November 15th, and then 17% happened on the 14th and 16th, 10% happened on the 13th and the 17th, etc. that seems to be pretty consistent across most of North America, except to, as you said, in the South, it gets wonky.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. We looked at, not too long ago, I think Mark found it. There was a graph of Florida, and it was like there were like 4 or 5 different peak breeding. It was really odd. So, like to Lee's point, I don't know how that photo period then correlates with those southern states where just, literally a county over, it's completely different.
Yeah, and that's what I've always wondered too. And again, this is not me. This is just what I've read and what I've been told. But what I've picked up on that topic is that there's been a tremendous amount of deer relocation in the South. So there's been a lot of little pockets of deer where a little pocket of Florida or a little pocket of Mississippi in the 60s or whenever this was happening, they went and got deer from Wisconsin or Michigan or some of these other northern states, brought those deer down, and that's how these little micro populations of deer were repopulated. And so one of the theories out there is that because of that, kind of genetically ingrained in those populations is the need to have a photo period or whatever that relationship might be different than around them. Now, I think that you're going to see the farther north you get, these deer and the photo period kind of relationship and correlation is stronger because you need to have a consistent breed. You need the right fawn drop in a northern deer herd because
for survival.
Exactly, because if you're dropping those fawns too early in the year when it's still too cold and there's no food out there, those fawns aren't going to survive. If you're dropping the fawns too late in the year, they're getting too late of a start and they're not going to be old enough and have the nutrition necessary to handle that cold that's going to start arriving in the fall. So that timing is really important for the species up in the north. But when you get down to the south, those deer, it's not as necessary. So that consistent fawn drop, having the peak breeding at the right time, just if you look at natural selection, it's not as important. So that's not selected for through mating and whatnot. So that's what I hear. That's what I've read. I don't know if it answers all the questions, but that's kind of what the science shows right now. But it's endlessly fascinating. And I think there's so many questions to Lee, like what you said, the food sources. I mean, I think there's a lot of different things that impact the rut for hunters. And maybe that's what's more important for us is what, how does it impact the hunting, right, Lee? So I don't know if you have any other thoughts on hunting factors.
About that. I've had friends that like way back when I worked at One Archery in Minnesota. There's a guy that came around. He'd bring live deer. He'd do seminars and he sold deer pee and stuff. But he would come in any time of the year and he could keep the antlers on his bucks. From normally when through March and all the way as long as he wanted to drop them. He had to do is keep some hot does, not let them breed and keep them in cycle. And he said that the testosterone would stay in there and they could keep the horns on them. So like when he would come around and do his seminars and stuff there, it was after the hunting season into, coming into the summer and his bucks all still had horns. He said, yeah, I can keep the horns on them, late and all that stuff. So, I think there's, that you can manipulate that, when, I think the bucks will be ready to breed anytime in the does as long as they don't get bred. They just keep coming into that cycle. But it was pretty interesting, just guys that had had deer farms and things like that, how they could, they could keep the horns on the deer as long as they wanted to, really. So it is interesting, it is, that's so much about whitetails is that, there's so many things you don't know. I mean, there's a lot of things that you do, but like this, I'm sure it is the shortening of the days when it triggers the testosterone and all that, like you're talking about. But, when it comes right down to the exact days of the rut, boy, that's a tough one to say. But, like basically most of the time you hunt in the same areas and you kind of know when that's going to be. Like anytime we're in the Midwest, if you get into the first part of November, it's going to be on. So, but so much of it, what you see is going to be weather related. A lot of times people say, there was no rut this year. It's like, well, yeah, because they're all the does are bred. It was this might be at night or whatever, but weather will make such a dependent on whether you see it or not. Because when it's warm out, boy, they just do most of it at night, and we see that so much. Just how weather dependent it can be.
So, in your opinion, you guys spend every day out there, like you said. You spend every day during the hunting season out, kind of witnessing what's happening around you. So, in your opinion, year after year, in your area, what are the days that you just would not miss? You know, if you're a hunter and you need to take a vacation or whatever to get, you know, off to go hunting, what's the period that you just would not miss?
My favorite day is November 7th, but if I had to, I'd tell people if it was like the 4th through the 14th or something like that. A lot of times when I get to around the 15th, they start getting locked down. You can hear by the helper over there. He's wanted to put in his 2 cents too. But yeah, if I had to, it'd be like the 5th or the 4th through the 14th or 15th. A lot of times when I get to the 15th, they start getting locked down, or a lot of our big ones all have does. And then it can be the worst time of the year. You get so many people that, man, I want to just come out there and hunt during the rut. And it's like, yeah, if you hit those right days, you do. But once they get in lockdown, it can be a terrible time. You know, I always tell people, if it's cold in late season, you have a way better chance of killing one than you do during the rut, because it can be finicky with weather. You know, here we're in southern Iowa, and it can be in the 70s in November, and most of the rut activity be at night, and all of a sudden you get, you know, it's such a short period. You know, you got those 7-10 days of good hunting, and then all of a sudden you get to like the 15th, and it just seems like it just locks down, and it can be really terrible hunting, and you know, even until you get to the end of November. But you know, you can have great days in there too. But it's all happening then. But I always tell people, if you want to be guaranteed, if it's cold weather, late season, you're gonna have way better seeing our big deer than you are during the rut, because you know there's a lot of deer here and lots of does. So it's like you get a big one, just catching them in between is tough. Just being in that one right spot, you know, on any farm, it's like, you know, just being in, you know, so many times you go check cameras and the buck you're after was on a different field or different place, and, you know, 200 yards from me, and you're like, God, you know, that was my chance. He was in between does and I missed him. Now you got to wait another week. But, you know, late season, it's like every single day they're out. As long as it's cold, you know, you have a better chance of seeing them anyway.
As far as
to me, the rut can be rated a little bit, but you know, because it can be awesome, but it can be terrible too if you got warm weather.
Yeah. Mark Jury always says that as well. Late season would be where to hedge your bets
when
if you got the food source.
Yeah. Now, speaking of the warm weather, Lee, how do you handle a warm weather period during the rut? How does that change your hunting strategy?
Well, mostly unfortunately it gets worse, but you have to spend more time. And, you know, I'd get in the timber, and we put, you know, with our bobcats going and put little ponds and stuff in the timber, and it seems like that's where I'll have, you know, decent luck on those hot days. Is a lot of times, you know, but you got to sit there all day, because a lot of times it's midday and those bucks that come in, and, you know, even when they have does bedded down with them or whatever, they'll get up and go take a drink in the middle of the day. So, you know, it's tough. I mean, back in the old days, like you're talking about, Matt, when we were first doing our video, I mean, Tiffany and I both had jobs, and you just took vacation days to go hunt. So you hunted all day, every day. And that's why it seems like, you know, even though we only had a week or two to hunt back then, we were successful because you spent all day. But now that, you know, this is what we do for a job, and you hunt every day of the season, if you try to do that, hunt all day, every day, you just burn yourself out. So, you know, so many times you just go for, you know, in the morning till 10 or 11 and go in and eat or go change spots or whatever and go check cameras and get back out in the afternoon. But so many of those times back in the old days, you were always shooting our deer like between 11 and 12 and stepping in the timber, you know, and so many times we hunted in Buffalo County and Ted Marum and those places where we just had little ponds in the woods. And that's what we've done here too. We got little ponds and even the creeks is not so much. There's water everywhere. People are like, well, I don't need ponds. We got creeks here, but they just don't seem to like to go down to the creek where they get so much open on all sides of them. It's like the small ones that are, you know, we have 30-foot round ponds in the middle of the timber where they feel comfortable going in. But those are the times that when it gets tough and it's warm weather, you just basically got to sit there all day and stuff, and we hardly don't do it all that often because, like I said, you just burn yourself out. But if I only had 1 week to hunt, like I said, it would be the 4th through the 14th, and I'd be sitting there all day. And you would, within that time frame, you'd at least see, if not get a shot at one of your good ones for sure.
Can you describe for us some of your like ideal rut setups? What would some of your best spots look like for rut hunting?
My best spot is a spot I call the knob stand. It's right in the middle of the timber, but it's like a big ridge, and then it drops down. It's on the far from where Mark and Terry had the blowout. But we have big food plots. I call them we have our food plots that are like our killing plots, but then I have like what I call my destination food plots, which are my big fields. And, we muzzleloader hunt on them, but it's not something that I really, bow hunt on much because they're big. 20-acre cornfields or bean fields. But this spot works perfect. If it's in the timber and you got your little road, I can go back in and get into the stands in the timber, while all the deer are out in those destination fields. So when I get on that ridge, on there, it just drops straight down to the creek. The other side of the creek is our big destination food plot. So every time you're sitting in that, in the mornings, all the deer would come piling off that big food plots up over across the creek, and they pile up, right up onto that ridge. But that's where all the does bed. You find those spots like in the wintertime when we're shed hunting. You find all the beds and stuff that are up in there, and because it's funny because you go look at the stand and you look at it and you're like, really? You want to sit in that thing? Because it's pretty open. And it seems like you can get picked off up there, but you hardly ever do. But it's open timber. It's like where a lot of it is thick and underbrush, but this really probably needs to be cut and needs to be thickened up. But that's really the reason that a lot of does and a lot of deer in general bed in there, especially in the wintertime when it starts getting cold because sunlight comes in there. And, there's really hardly any underbrush. And they lay on those ridges, and you see that in the snow. And then that's where I find a lot of my sheds, too, is right on that knob. It seems like the bucks and the does like to lay there. But that when we hunt there, you get all these does come up, and like before the rut, they come in their bed all around you, and it's hard to get out of there. So that's why you're forced. A lot of times they always got to stay here all day until they get up and go back down. But finding those spots where all the does are during shed season is really when you find out where you want to hunt in the timber, and it's always the beds and stuff from in the snow. But that spot is just one of those places because if the deer aren't coming up there and bedding there, the bucks will always be cruising that thing. Every day, if there's a buck that doesn't have a doe, he'll cruise that ridge because there'll always be does on it, and they'll always come up there and check it out. So, we have so many great spots that are, on field edges, but I probably hunted more days in that stand than any other stand. I shot more deer out of that stand than any other stand that we've had too.
Now, when you're setting up in a stand like that, basically a doe bedding area during the rut, do you like to get right in the middle of that bedding area, or are you typically going downwind of it to try to catch them on that downwind side cruising?
Well, this spot was just I just picked the tree, and it turned out that it's the perfect spot if you have a northwest wind, because most of them will bed out in front of you, all the does and stuff. But I don't know what it is, but it seems like every buck that comes in there will walk right to that tree. And I don't know. I mean, there are highways that come, one comes east and west off, and one north and south, and it's kind of right in the corner of two big trails. But it seems like anytime you see a buck, if you see one in there, he's coming to that tree. And we have my camera guys and Jeff is here right now. We're just going to go, we're actually going to go change that stand because the stands are getting old. We're going to do a bunch. We were just talking about this morning. We got to go change the knob stand. But it's one that we've hunted more than anything. But we hunted on a northwest wind because it's a big ridge that comes up, but then it's a big dip down below. So even when deer get behind you, they're way below you. And so many times the wind will go right over the top of you, and you get away with it no matter what, unless they get way up on the other side of the ridge, but then they're so far away it doesn't matter that much, that you can't even see the deer that are up there. But it's a perfect setup because there's little food plots all around that that I have in the timber there too. Yeah, I got a little guy here wanting to get up and talk about deer hunting too. But yeah, it's perfect because 7 food plots in the timber that we hunt, we do really well on those too. Because it's nice you can go get into those little food plots without spooking any deer out, because most of them are down those big fields, and then they come up in the timber, and then they'll hit my little food plots and stuff before they go to bed again. So we got roads, all my farm roads that I bring the tractors in and everything, so you can get in there quietly. And you hardly ever spook deer out of there, in the mornings going in. But it's up on a hill, so like I said, deer that get down on the downwind side of you, they're 20 feet below you. So normally your scent goes right over the top of them. And so that's the only thing. You got to wait for like a north or northwest wind. But it's been so good. Like this last year, we had a couple big deer on that farm that I hunted on lots of different winds too. And some of them were a little bit shaky. But boy, it's amazing because it's up on a hill that you can even with south winds, the ones that are coming right at you. If the pressure's right and stuff, a lot of people still go right over the top of them, even with the wind blowing right to them. So it's my favorite stand, but we have quite a few of those, but that one just seems to be the one that, for 20 years since we've been hunting here, that was the first farm we bought, and that's still, it was like one of the first stands we put up, and just getting that information from Mark and Terry where they were. This is probably 500 or 600 yards down from where they had it, but it's been 20 years producing every year.
It's amazing how that works. A lot of times, just thinking back when you're on a farm and you see an old timer set, a wooden set in a tree, a lot of times that's, you're hanging in a tree right next to it, right? Because it's the spot.
Good sign.
It's amazing, because I think those deer patterns, I mean, they're happening through time for certain reasons, and when you find that right tree, you stick to it because it's the right spot.
Yeah, as long as there's not some dramatic change in terrain or food sources or something like that, the deer do what they do for a reason.
Yeah.
And that usually doesn't change year after year.
Yeah.
So that's a great point. You mentioned a little bit a while ago about your field edges and how you sometimes hunt that during the rut. And I imagine trail cameras are factoring a lot into how you're choosing where to go during the rut as well. Is that accurate? And can you elaborate at all on how trail cams fit into your rut strategy?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, because like I was saying, on that farm, like when most of our farms have gone in and dozed small food plots, an acre to 3 acres, some in the timber, and those are the ones that during the rut that I look at most of our deer off of little food plots for archery. So and like I said, I'll always have big destination food plots that you can keep deer there all winter long, so you're not losing them to your neighbors. I want to bring all my neighbors' deer in the winter time. So I'll always have big food plots, but on those small ones, it works out all the time, because and that's nice about, like, on that farm, and most of my farms are set up that way too. But I go in on the farm roads and I get, like, say, to the knob stand. On my way out, I'll just go around all my little food plots and check all my cameras. So every day that I'm hunting that farm, I'll check those cameras. And you'll always see it, like, especially during the rut, that nothing, because the buck you're looking for is locked down, and all of a sudden you'll get like a picture of him on every food plot, and he's in between does. You got to get out there, and that works. I mean, the cameras have put a lot of bucks on my walls, more than anything. I always said, cameras are next to my bows. This thing kills more deer for me than anything. But like a deer I call Heavy D is when I hit early in the year, and I was so mad, I hit him in the top of the shoulder. He's right underneath me, and it didn't penetrate in, and I'm just so mad, thinking, you only get a chance at a deer like that once in a lifetime. Then he disappeared, of course, after you hit him, and nothing. But then I started getting some pictures of him, and I could find one of them walked right next to the camera, and I could even see the threads of my Rage broadhead sticking up,
Wow.
that the arrow shaft had come unscrewed. So you can see it was just, it was barely in. But still, I had just a couple of pictures of him. And then this is on the same farm. It wasn't on the knob stand, but one I call the Heavy D field now. It's literally 400 or 500 yards from the knob stand. Wouldn't check that camera there, and on another little food plot that's kind of connected to it. And he was in there like for 3 days in a row, all day checking, because I hadn't been back in there for a couple of days. I went and checked it, and on the 16th or on the 15th of November, and that's about the time he had been locked down the whole rest of the first part of November. And all of a sudden, checking all these cameras, he's everywhere. I mean, all day and night. I was all right, I got to get in there. The next morning, went in, killed him in the Heavy D. It's, we named it after him in that field. But without cameras, you wouldn't know. And I just did a piece on Tiffany, a buck that she killed last year too. We called the mule deer buck. Her mom had, like 3 years ago when she killed the buck, we saw this deer, and he was like a 4 or 5 year old buck, just a 9 point, just a nice buck. But we called him the mule deer buck because he had just a really totally white face and a black cap. His head looked just like a mule deer. But the next year, but he was hardly ever there. We just get a couple pictures of him. He didn't live there. He obviously lived on a neighboring farm. But just during the rut, you'd see him, get a few pictures of him. So the next year, he hurt his elbow or his front knee, and it was all swollen up. He was limping on his knee, and he jacked up his rack. I mean, it was his left knee that was banged up, and his right side just had like a drop tine and just kind of a mass of stuff out there. I was like, that deer will be screwed up, forever. But we never saw him that year. Just had pictures of him. But all the pictures have been on the same field, and where Linda saw him was on that same field. But then the next year, last year, he would have been like 6 or 7. All of a sudden, he showed him. I actually sent him the pictures to Mark Drury. He said, "What do you think of this deer?" Because he just had all these inside points. Like, boy, he just, how big do you think he is? And everything. He goes, I don't know. I think that's what he definitely need to be hunting. But I had a couple pictures of him in velvet, early season, but then he disappeared again. He was never there. So then we just kept checking the cameras, and just like the previous 2 years, there was like 2 days that he was in that field again. I said, he's in between does. You got to get out there, Tiffany, because this deer doesn't live there. She went out. Well, she went out the one night and he came out, but it was too dark because she was in a blind. Because it had to be in a blind in the corn. So it gets darker in a blind even. When you look at the footage, like, boy, it looks like it should have been light enough to shoot, but she just couldn't see it through her peep and stuff. So, she just left him that night, but he went out the next night. And then came out again, and she smoked him. It was, whatever, it was 182-inch buck. It was her best deer ever. But it was amazing because he was still limping on that knee. His knee was all swollen up. But, boy, he straightened out that rack, though, because that other side had all these inside points, and everything was just giant. But without cameras on, and I can tell you 20 stories like that just cameras are, okay, you see them, they're in between does, get out there now. And it's like once they got their little area that they're chasing the does on, like on my little food plot someplace, boy, they'll be in there like every day for 3, 4, 5 days until that doe is hot, and then they'll be gone again. You won't pictures of them again for a week or 2. So the cameras we killed so many deer like that. Without cameras, you wouldn't have near the success that we do.
I was going to ask you, how long do you think that period is when a buck is in between does? Like you kept saying, 3 days or so. Is that because on my lease, like, it seems like it's a very short amount of time, and then I see them all over, and then they're gone, and they are gone.
It's normally sometimes I bet you don't even see it, and that's why a lot of times they're gone for 2 and 3 weeks, because a lot of times you have so many does, but it seems like the times that we did, like when Tiffany killed hers was November 26th, Heavy D was the 16th. As the later you get, it seems like, more and more of the does are getting bred. So the later in November you get, the longer that period can be. I mean, they couldn't find, you never know. They could find one in 6 minutes. But that's why it seems like the early part, is once you see a big one on a doe, like a lot of times, like my real old bucks, I'll see them like in the last, like around Halloween and the first 3 or 4 days, and then they'll just disappear. But then they won't show up at all again until like the 26th or 25th or something like that. Because I think they're just finding them so fast that you're not even getting chances to. They're not even cruising the food plots looking. They're just so many does, they just go take one right away. But it seems like a lot of these times that we've been successful has been later in November, where probably a lot of those other does are getting bred. So there's just less to choose from. The later you get, the longer it is in between. So, but like I said, Tiffany's was on the 26th, and mine was on the 16th. But there's a lot of them like that. But so many times, I think there's times you don't, a buck will disappear. And November 1st, you don't see them again until December. But they're just, I'm sure there's some time in between, but you don't have cameras everywhere, so you try to. We've got probably 300 or 400 out, but you still can't cover every place.
Yeah.
So it's tough, especially when you got a lot of does. You really got to start thinning those out if they're getting too many.
Yeah.
But with the HD that we've had the past few years, we haven't done at all. We're trying to build our herd back up. So
on the trail camera front, so if I'm hearing you right, if I had to like boil it down to like the basics of your trail camera strategy during the rut, would you say it's accurate to say that you're checking as often as possible, but only in areas that you can easily access? So areas that you're already passing through, and it sounds like you're maybe driving in, so you're not impacting that deer herd and educating them. And then you're using that information to make quick decisions about when to be in the right place, when that buck is not locked down. A, is that like an accurate simplification of what you're doing and why you're doing it? And then B, where specifically are you putting those cameras? Like, are they just on field edges because they're food plots, or are they on scrapes, or what there?
Yeah, the second question first. Like, most of my cameras are always on plot edges and on scrapes, because you're just gonna get a lot of bucks in them. And I've never used cameras really to kill deer so much, although it ends up that way. It's more to take inventory of deer. It's not like you put them up, you get a strategy. Okay, I saw this buck coming down this trail. 3 days in a row at 3 o'clock. So I'm going to get there at 2 o'clock, and at 3 o'clock it's going to come. It never really works that way. It's more, you just got to know an area that a buck is coming to, and mostly my food plots. And the reason I have them mostly on the edge of the food plots is just for that reason, is that if I take my Ranger in and to go hunt someplace, then when I'm done, I'll just cruise it around the fields and pull all the cards, and so I can check them easy without going into the woods. And that's the reason I think that, we've really seen a lot is that I used to write articles, I think, on just no pressure and low pressure and all that stuff, but I don't think that's the case. I started looking at back in the early days, when I was hunting 20 years ago, if you saw a big deer, it was coming out the last 30 seconds of light. Now we're seeing these 6-7-year-old bucks out at 3 in the afternoon. It's like, why is that? And I think a lot of it is because it's not that we have no pressure, it's that we have consistent pressure over the entire year. So like every day I go out, I'm doing something with deer that I'm home, which is most of the time. But I'll go out and I'll take my Rangers, and I'll drive like every day, like 2-3 times a week on every farm. I'll go out and check cameras and check my field and check my food plots. But I think over the 9 months of non-hunting, they're used to me being in there, and a lot of them I'm filling feeders and putting out minerals and stuff, and they're associating me 9 months of the year with food. I'm filling the feeders, and they're used to me being there all the time. And like now, a lot of them won't even run out of the fields. I run off to the edge of the field, stand in, and I'll come right back out. But then when I get to deer hunting season, then I kind of do it the same way. I'm into each one of those farms just 2 or 3 times a week, hunting them around. So over a 12-month period, it never changes. And I think the problem is like if you don't go in there in your farms all year round, it's the exact opposite of what most people's places are. You go, nobody's in there for 9-10 months of the year, and all of a sudden you get the hunting season, and even hunting it just on the weekends is pressure to them. Hey, something is different. They notice, they always know that you're there. So I think that's why I always make sure I take my gas Ranger and any of my electrics all summer and make sure they hear the thing and going around checking all the cameras, all the food plot stuff, so that when it gets to hunting season, that doesn't change for them. And that's, I think, the difference. You go like I used to hunt in Wisconsin. Once you got to gun season, you might as well forget it. You never see a deer unless you have a spotlight at midnight, because it's like I think so much of the year there's no pressure. Bugs and hot and muggy and stuff in the woods. There's nobody in there, and the deer just get used to nobody being there. And all of a sudden you get to gun season, and you got the pumpkin patch comes out, and there's 1,000 orange jackets in every tree. They just freak out. It's just totally different. But like for us, it's like November doesn't look any different than July did to them. Or it makes no difference what month it is. It's always the same routine. And then you just look at deer that live in the suburbs. They're bedding in people's yards. They're in your driveway. It's not because there's no pressure. It's because they smell people all the time, and it's never harmed them. So that's kind of the way that we've got our farms going. I make sure that I'm out there a lot, but I'm always in the fields. Like I said, it's pretty miserable in the timber, so I usually try to stay out of the timber, and that's why a lot of our hunts will be on those field edges, because that's where I feel deer are used to being there. And I think I can get away with a lot more scent too, because during the summers, I don't do anything with scent control. You're sweating and everything. They get a snout full of Lee and Tiffany every day of the year. But then when I go out to hunt, we do everything that we possibly can. And even so many times they come down windy and they smell you and they do, they caught you. They got to give you the head bob and the stomp and everything. But then they flick the tail and walk through. Then you got them. But they just figure, hey, Lee was here an hour ago, or is that 200 yards, not 20 yards right there. So I think we get with a lot more. They'll tolerate a lot more of our scent because they know us, and I think they'll tolerate a lot more of us just hunting, 2-3 times a week on every one of the farms, because they've grown up that way. A lot of these deer every old deer that we have now, has grown up here. I mean, we've got most of our farms that we've had for 10 to 12 to 8, 9 years. I mean, every deer that's alive on there, their whole life has been the same thing with us being around in there, and it's never bothered them. So I think that's really, really added to our success, is why we're seeing a lot of our old bucks. We're seeing a lot of them in broad daylight. It doesn't have to be the last or first camera light, and this, so we can get away with a lot of scent. And like I said, we used to write articles about no pressure and keeping anything out of there. I think that's wrong. I think it's consistent pressure year round, that it never changes. July shouldn't look any different than November to a deer. And so I think it's really worked for us that way. And that's why, I put the cameras on the field edges. I check them all year round. I never take them down because I'm always checking them through, shed season to see when my big ones are down or which ones that have dropped. So when our big one, you see it one side down or both sides down on them. Okay, I'm getting out there and getting them before the squirrels do, or my neighbors or somebody else. But then, by the time you're done with shed season, you're in turkey season. So I was like, well, let's just kind of see where the turkeys are, what fields they're in, where they're at and stuff. And by the time turkey season's over, well, now they're already up. The twos are starting to split off. I might as well just get pictures of them all the way through. So I keep them going year round. So I'm always checking them and always looking at them. And so the deer get used to me, going around the fields, pulling cards. So, that's the way when I'm hunting that farm, I'll normally go and pull them all when I come out in the afternoon.
Kind of flies in the face of everything you as a hunter you've heard or whatever, but it makes sense.
It makes logical sense too. And
yeah.
and
well, think about the farmer.
Right.
Every farmer always says like they ain't scared of that truck. They don't care about that 4-wheeler. Because they see that farmer every day, and the guy's never threatened them.
Right.
And he's probably feeding them. Whether he knows it or not. So it does make sense.
Yeah, I mean, you're basically conditioning them to a certain stimuli, and they basically eventually, as long as it's not associated with a negative consequence for them, it's not so bad.
Pavlov.
Yeah,
Pavlov's dog. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I've heard Lee mention this before, and it always kind of every time I hear it, I'm like, oh man, I don't know if that work where I'm at, but it makes sense, and maybe it could be applied in certain ways. Like for example, I know some guys even in Michigan who use a slightly adjusted version of this, but just with trail cameras. Leading up to this season, they start doing this, and they do the drive-in midday, check cameras almost every day possibly can on their properties, and they do somewhat condition them to that type of activity. And even in a heavily pressured state like Michigan, I think in some circumstances, according to a few people I've talked to, it works. So I think you have to be careful how you apply it.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting theory, and it obviously works for Lee, and I'm curious to see how it might work other places.
Well, Mark's talked about this before because I asked him this last year when he killed Danger, the 217 buck that he killed. He put that box blind up just like days before, they killed that deer. And I said, weren't you afraid? Because it's a pretty bold move, right? Yeah. On a deer that size. And, I go, weren't you afraid that new structure in the middle of his bedroom was going to freak him out? And he's like, no. He goes, these deer have lived around, especially, they've lived around these blinds or these structures their entire life, to Lee's point. It's like, they don't know any different. It's just something new. It's just, right. Set up there one day and one day it wasn't. It doesn't mean anything to them. Yeah. So,
and I think, it varies. It's all property and location dependent, right? Some areas, these deer might be way more jumpy about something like that. Some areas they won't be, and you just got to kind of figure out what your region's like or what your specific deer herd's like.
The DNA of your farm.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, figure out the DNA of your farm and those deer, and then once you kind of have your head wrapped around that, then stick to that carefully. Respect whatever level of impact they'll allow.
Yeah.
And then hunt smart.
Very cool.
So we've been on here a pretty decent time, Matt. Do we need to wrap things up here?
Yeah, I appreciate you joining us, Lee. I always love hearing you and Tiffany's perspective, because you guys, like I said, you've been doing it for so many years at such a high level.
Oh, yeah.
And, that you don't get there by accident. So I appreciate you joining us.
I'd love to have you on again sometime in the future, Lee, just to hear your stories, to hear more stories about all these different hunts you've been on. I'm sure there's some interesting ones in there, and I enjoyed getting to hear a few today. So thank you, Lee.
Anytime, man. I love, anytime I can talking about deer, I'm in.
Yep.
Good deal.
Ditto. All right. Well, thank you so much. Good luck the rest of the season, Lee. And then I'll leave our listeners and viewers with a quick reminder that if you'd like to submit a listener-submitted question of your own for a future guest and for us, you can definitely do that. We'd love it if you did. You can head over to wiredtohunt.com/100% wild. That's 100, then the words % wild. There'll be instructions for exactly how to do that. You can also subscribe to the audio version of this podcast on the Apple Podcast app, Stitcher, Google Play, Wherever you listen to your podcasts, we will be there.
As always, you can follow along and watch the podcast at Drury Outdoors YouTube channel. And while you're there, please subscribe because we have nonstop, constant hunts, original hunts that we're hitting every day. DOD TV, killing in the kitchen, all kinds of cool stuff. So, as always, follow us on social media at Drury Outdoors. And until next time,
Thanks for listening, guys.
peace.